The following was originally written and recorded in March 2020 as number 7 in a series going under the heading Peter's Aged Awareness. Originally, each of these essays followed a quotation from various of Duane Heppner's Amazing Romantic Adventures series, books that should be read by anyone interested in escaping this physical plane and the dire things that are rapidly approaching us. Since early in this life, I have been fascinated by the unknown, and one particular facet of this is an undying interest in cryptozoology, the study of as yet unclassified animals. It has to be said, mainly manifested itself in the hunt for lake monsters and finding out all I can about these and their elusive cousins, the so-called great sea serpent. I am perhaps unlikely to ever see a live or come to that dead specimen of the latter in this lifetime, and am trying to convince myself that as I am satisfied they exist, it would be greedy of me to expect to see one, as the real universe has generously granted me an irrefutable close-up view in 1977 of the long neck and head of one of their landlocked cousins in Loch Ness. It is a question of severing tap lines to avoid being pulled back to this world, as if by cords, as the Buddhists put it. In so saying, I am not advocating adherence to an earthly religion, but I do consider Buddhism more a way of life than a religion as such. Certainly, it has much of use to help us on our battle to shake off the shackles of this physical universe, but that is all. As regards werewolves, I have to say I had until recently considered them, along with vampires, apart from the very physical South American bats, a thing of folklore and Hollywood, despite the brave efforts of Lon Chaney and Bela Lugosi to convince us otherwise. However, this was before coming across Duane's fascinating books. The next port of call of Duane in the passage I had originally quoted concerns a visit to a vampire's castle. This, along with Kevin and Gwen, my wife's ardent expeditions to Cannock Chase on the hunt for werewolves, has convinced me it is a whole area I have overlooked, and if I ever find the time, to perhaps study in any depth. The big question often posed with regard to unexplained animals is whether they are actually flesh and blood, or in fact not really of this earth, but occasionally visitors, much like some ghosts, a subject I briefly touched on in an earlier essay in this series. As regards my one and only, albeit spectacular, sighting, the one at Loch Ness, I have always been of the opinion it was a flesh and blood creature. It looked like an animal, and it behaved like an animal, ergo it probably was an animal. Others included the then curator of fishes at the British Natural History Museum agreed when having seen Gwen's film of it. Unfortunately, many know-all self-appointed experts who were conspicuous by their absence on the day thought otherwise and have done everything they can to undermine it, and it seems to have disappeared from view. Well, that's their loss. For my part, I am truly grateful to the real universe for sharing one of its greatest earthly secrets with Gwen and me, and on other occasions with a small truth-seeking and largely vilified number of others. Having recently read a small but absorbing book about Cannock Chase, I am greatly enthused to accompany Kevin and Gwen's next expedition there, perhaps when the weather improves after the string of storms we've had recently and the almost unbelievable floods resulting in various parts of the UK. It really seems that the dark powers that be are stoking things up for the coming showdown with the human race, what with the horrendous so-called natural disasters and the coronavirus itself so obviously being a convenient stepping stone towards the immune system destroying abomination known as 5G. Cannock Chase appears to be one of the, if not the most heavily so-called paranormal places in the UK. Apart from werewolves, there have been numerous sightings reported of UFOs, big cats, phantom children, giant snakes and spiders, and weird hybrid creatures like the pigman. It is a large, mysterious, partly wooded area in Staffordshire, England, and has a somewhat bleak history, including several notorious murder cases in the area. As I mentioned earlier, it has often been considered that many, if not all, oddly misplaced and weird animals, and humans come to that, are actually not indigenous to this plane of existence, but somehow appear here, albeit briefly, in some form of excursion from their own universes for who knows what reasons. From Duane's writings, it certainly seems that werewolves and vampires, at the least, more usually inhabit locations on the real side, as opposed to this material physical level. However, many weird hybrid creatures, not only in Cannock Chase but elsewhere in the world, may be the result of very physical medical experiments of which there is much evidence available. That great humanitarian, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, who murdered 3 or 4 times as many civilians in his camps, etc., as Hitler ever did, apparently ordered one of his top scientists in the field to try to produce an army of mindless ape men, hybrids between men and apes. We are told the scientists failed to achieve this despite several filmed ghoulish experiments with poor helpless monkeys, including transferring heads from one to another, and ended up in one of the aforesaid holiday camps. There are other islands of Dr. Moreau places supposedly in the world, including the USA. As for Cannock Chase, it is believed there may be underground tunnels built by the military which go out for miles to nuclear bases where who knows what other activities may be going on, perhaps even trying to emulate Uncle Joe and his ape-man army. Certainly there was a report of a convoy of military vehicles going into the woods and then mysteriously disappearing, their tracks in the mud and undergrowth suddenly coming to a dead end. One investigator claims to have dug the earth up around this location and to have struck new concrete. Another pleasantry to be found in the area is a German cemetery holding some 5,000 bodies. It appears there are German servicemen here from both world wars. Many were collected from around the country to centralise them, and the official story goes to aid relatives to come over and find their loved ones or ancestors. It seems, in fact, many of them died through extreme maltreatment in British concentration camps round and about, including starvation and untreated diseases in World War I. I knew the British invented the concentration camp in the Boer War in Africa, but I hadn't realised they had carried on using them, let alone in the UK. Not something you hear much about really, is it? There are obviously many things governments keep from us. In fact, the list is probably endless. The UFO cover-up is one good example. There has been so much written and so many TV programmes about this subject that it is pretty well known, and I don't intend saying much about it here, save to repeat that Cannock Chase has seen more than its fair share of UFO-related incidents, including abductions. It seems rather a coincidence about the military presence spoken of earlier, since much UFO activity seems to centre on military installations, and I don't believe in coincidences. Of course, not all supposed paranormal phenomena at Cannock Chase is exactly that. Sightings of enormous snakes have been reported and may well be escapees, as snake keeping for pets is now big business in the UK like the USA. However, unlike Florida, nowhere in the UK is hot enough for long enough to sustain really large snakes, most likely Burmese pythons if they are escapees, or discarded pets, as they require a temperature ideally around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry, I'll never get my head around centigrade. For a comfortable survival, and it is significant that when sizable snakes are reported at Cannock Chase, they are not over a very long period. As it is, our only 3 native species of snake are relatively small and would hardly fit the bill. The longest, the harmless grass snake, rarely exceeding 4 to 5 feet. The harmless and extremely rare smooth snake and the mildly venomous adder are smaller still. Though I've been to many places in the UK where there are supposed to be snakes, even having warning signs up about the adders, I've never had the good fortune in 74 years to see one. However, I have high hopes about my first visit to Cannock Chase, which is supposed to have plenty. Similarly, reports of panthers and similar big cats may well have resulted from the passing of a law a few years back in the UK regarding the needing of licences to keep dangerous predatory animals, when many unscrupulous owners kindly set their carnivorous beasts free in wild places, evidently such as Cannock Chase. We had a Burmese python for many years when Kevin bought it at a local pet shop. He was assured the then 2 to 3 feet snake was a male and would not get very big. It's only the females that do that. By the time it had outgrown the 6 by 4 by 4 feet vivarium I had made for it in the spare bedroom, and I could drape it over my shoulders such that both ends touched the floor, we had come to the conclusion that he was in fact a she, and could potentially grow well over 20 feet long. Although she was such a docile and beautiful animal, and it was heartbreaking to let her go, we realised it wasn't fair on her to keep her in such now cramped conditions, and managed to find a collector who was more than delighted with her. He rang me a few days after collecting her to say he had had her checked out at the local zoo where he lived, and confirmed she was a female and in excellent condition. She had also been measured and found to be 12 feet long. He was going to breed from her, as he already had a suitable male in his collection. At the time, I have to say, I wasn't aware of the aforementioned law, but though she was certainly a predatory animal, as indicated above, she was very docile, and I never considered her dangerous, although I understand the rule of thumb is that there should always be at least 2 people present when handling snakes in excess of 8 feet. Clearly, however, she was going to get bigger, and a large constrictor is known to have the strength of 20 men, so discretion probably was the better part of valour in the end, and we parted company while we were still winning. Getting back to government cover-ups, one other I wish to discuss is that concerning free energy. In April 1997, I finally achieved something that was by now top of my bucket list. We went to New York City. A dream I had had since I was a schoolboy, collecting photographs of the skyscrapers and finding out everything I could about them, until I could identify some 120 buildings in a city 3,000 miles away across a seemingly impassable giant pond. How sad. We were lucky with the weather and had 4 beautiful sunny spring days there. When booking the visit, there had been a choice of several hotels, and I could not believe my luck when one of them turned out to be the magnificent 40-story New Yorker. I had no hesitation in booking it, as high a floor as possible, please. When we got there, it turned out we were on the 28th floor. Since the hotel stands on the northwest corner of 8th Avenue and West 34th Street, I was expecting a breathtaking view of 34th Street, with the neighbouring Nelson Tower and the Empire State Building 3 blocks away. Sadly, we were on the west-facing side, looking out over the Hudson River and New Jersey. The only thing of much interest was what appeared to be a police station some 330 feet below us, with the continuous comings and goings of blue and whites. This was the second of only two disappointments while we were in New York. The first one had been the cars. They all looked much the same as ours. What had happened to all the great chromium-plated dinosaurs? All the time we were there I only spotted one classic, an elderly checker cab. Mind you, my main attention was on the buildings, but I did need to look carefully at the streets to cross them and avoid being run over. Everyone was driving on the wrong side of the road. Anyway, you may well be wondering where all this is going. Well, I didn't know at the time, and only found out fairly recently that no less a personage than the electrical genius Nikola Tesla had spent his last few years, and indeed died, in the New Yorker hotel, up on 33, only 5 floors above where we had stayed. From a recently televised series of programmes about him, it seemed he not only lived there, but was influential in its design. Back in 1928, it apparently opened in 1930. The presenters of the programme were allowed down into the bowels of the building and showed the bottom end of huge square-section metal ducts, which apparently run all the way up to the roof of the 470-foot-tall building, which from the original blueprints were intended to end in elaborate antennae. The building was in fact to be, perhaps the first in a series, a giant transmitter for his free energy beams, much like the specially constructed tower at Wardenclyffe, where Tesla conducted some of his experiments. In the event, it seems, things never got that far, and when he died in 1943, the FBI raided his rooms and made off with, they said afterwards, 30 trunks full of Tesla's papers. Later, the FBI claimed they found nothing of national or military interest, and that, for the time being, was that. However, the presenters of the programme moved to the Tesla Museum in Serbia, where he originally came from, and the curator there insisted that the FBI had sent them all the trunks they had, no doubt without contents they really thought were interesting, and that these numbered 60. We were shown some of them, empty of course. How does this stack up with the FBI's original assertion that they only took away 30? Moreover, Tesla himself at some point had made it known he actually had 80 such trunks. Curiouser and curiouser. It is known that Tesla was working on not only the possibility of free energy for everybody. JP Morgan, the banker, and General Electric were not amused, and soon put pay to any such nonsense. But his fabled death ray was seriously weighed up, it is said, by Franklin D. Roosevelt against the atom bomb in World War II, and we all know which one. It certainly wasn't the Japanese. It is said the death ray would have been able to take out approaching enemy aircraft 500 miles away. It has even been suggested that it was tried out on the Siberian location Tunguska in 1908, whose mysterious flattening over a huge area has never been adequately explained. And what of the Twin Towers? I'll leave you to work that one out. Finally, I usually end with a shared dream. If they are familiar, it is because they have usually already been the subject of a UK Skype with Duane. The following is no exception, except this was no dream. It happened in the physical. I drive out to visit somebody in Bletchley, famous for the wartime code breakers. At the premises of the person I was going to see, there were rows of parallel parking bays. I parked in one and clambered out of the car. Walking across the pavement, or sidewalk, I suddenly seemed to be propelled forward at some speed. It was as if I had been violently pushed, although I felt nothing touch me and there was nobody around anywhere near me. I crashed sideways on into some metal railings running parallel to a building wall, and about a foot away from the wall I ended up on my knees. I smashed against my right arm and seemed momentarily stuck there, unable to move and free my arm, although it was not jammed between the railings but rather positioned diagonally across them. I managed to get up in a bewildered state. I am sure I had not tripped, and even if I had, I did not believe I would have moved so fast and so forcefully into those railings. Needless to say, my arm was horrendously bruised, black as coal, for several days over a large area, and hurt like hell. This event seemed like the culmination of a succession of notably bad days, when nothing much went right, and indeed my office computer, printer and photocopier all decided to play up or break down. The following day was a notably good one, so I guess the attack, for that is what I am sure it was over. A few days later, however, the alternator on my car packed up. I hope things are now back to normal. We had been warned that if we accepted the NUUU ideas and started to pursue them, we could expect such things, and we were, to say the least, annoying the dark forces, who do not wish us to know of such things. We were also told we could expect protection from the real guides. I believe I was very much protected. I could have broken my arm, or even split my head open, which would have been disastrous work-wise and every way, but the real guides managed to prevent such a thing. When I discussed this with Kevin, I mentioned that looking back over my life, then almost 73 years of it, I have always felt protected and looked after by persons or things unknown, whether it be most recently from crazy idiots on the motorways, or a staggeringly near miss from a solid ring of steel or iron that came crashing down from a tall building I was walking past in Luton 4 or 5 years earlier. It missed me by about a yard at most and rolled past me before falling to a halt. If that had hit my head, there can be no doubt it would have taken me out. As I said to Kevin, this was some considerable time before I came across the NUUU, and he made the point that the real guides mark us out as potential NUUU material long before we actually come across it. For my part, rather than be put off by what was one of a succession of otherwise truly alarming events over a number of years, I know now why I have always felt protected and helped at various crises in my life. The dark forces behind these cowardly attacks have simply confirmed I am doing the right thing, and strengthened my resolve to continue. When I got back to the office that day, I shouted loudly "NUUU" in defiance. Oddly, before our aforementioned Skype started, 2 of the other NUUU folk were having a discussion about psychic attacks and comparing notes on their own experiences. Duane confirmed we could all expect more of the same, really as wake-up calls. The real guides will let them happen, but will not allow any serious outcomes to occur. Ending up on my knees symbolised to the dark forces my kowtowing to them, but not to worry about that. Let them think what they like.